And we have a lot of interesting things to cover today, thanks to our panel. I want to introduce our panel. We have Amber Malinovsky, and she works in institutional assessment, and she is kind of, if you work on Weave Online, she would be your gal. And then Candace Schaefer, who works in the University Writing Center. They were the first group to develop an interest in the technology that they're going to be sharing with you today, and we're really honored and excited that she's going to be here to explain it to you. Summer Hamilton from Mays Business School is a user of the software and has really had some interesting program-level assessment experiences with it. And then finally, Fran Gelwick from Wildlife and Fisheries, and they're using it to look at their program in terms of the assessment of wildlife and fisheries. So hopefully you'll get some good ideas of some things you can do and see some really great examples. I'm Lorraine Phillips, and I serve in the Office of Institutional Assessment. And I want to be sure to thank our cooperative sponsors. We put this series together, and we were really grateful for the Center for Teaching Excellence joining us, the Core Curriculum Council, led by Doug Slack, Measurement and Research Services, us, Student Life Studies, and Undergraduate Studies and Academic Services. Thank you, Martin Gunn, for being here, and University Writing Center. So we've been grateful that this group has sort of come together to have these conversations. So that we get on the same page, in case this is your first session in the series, this is the requirement that we're talking about when we're talking about whether we call it core competency assessment. Sometimes you hear it other terms, but we're really talking about that the institution identifies college-level general education competencies and the extent to which graduates have attained them. And that's why you see a lot of the things we've been talking about in our series so far have focused on kind of end of experience things for students. So you might say, well, what are our core competencies? And it's true, the provost just sent a newsletter out last week talking about those outcomes that they're developing on that academic roadmap. In my brief conversations with the group, that subcommittee, they've articulated to me that nobody is really against these things. It's that they want to continue to explore ways to make graduating from Texas A&M a more unique experience. But it's pretty hard not to embrace mastering your discipline and developing critical analytical skills, critical thinking basically, and communicating effectively, and providing ethical leadership in a global and diverse society, something Texas A&M has embraced and been working on for some time now. So these are the four things we're talking about in terms of how we want to look at whether or not graduates have attained them by the end of the Texas A&M experience. We worked with Faculty Senate and the Core Curriculum Council of the Faculty Senate to at least begin to develop a game plan for how we were going to do this. And the question we basically asked ourselves was, gosh, what are we already doing that we could use toward this end? And that's where you see a lot of the latter items. We also are working this semester on a capstone analysis project for writing, which you heard more about at our last session, Seminar 2. And we also just gave the Critical Thinking Assessment Test, which is an NSF-funded grant with Tennessee Technical University, and we were one of their sister institutions working on this, and we gave that test last semester, and we're waiting on our results, and we had a really enjoyable grading session of all of Texas A&M faculty members participating, and you heard more about that in Seminar 2 as well. Now what we're going to be talking about are basically ways to get closer to integrating the core competencies with technologies that make it easier for us to get the job done. And so today we're going to be talking about Weave Online, which is the university's assessment information management system. And we're also going to be talking about Waypoint Outcomes, which is a rubric management system. Candace will actually explain that much better than me. And then, of course, you'll get a chance to see how at the program level waypoint outcomes can be used, and that's where you'll hear from the Mays Business School and Summer Hamilton and Wildlife and Fisheries with Fran Gelwick. So, Amber?
I think a lot of you are Weave Online users, but I'll just give you kind of a brief overview of how it works. It's a subscription service, so we subscribe to it. It's hosted off-site in another place, so we access it through the web. And each academic program has a plan and can report in Weave Online, and we're also working with administrative and educational support units. They can also enter plans and reports in Weave Online. So I'm just going to show you a couple of screenshots that have to do specifically with the general education part of it. Above this screenshot, if you could see the whole screen, there's a place where people enter their outcome and they type a description and they can associate it with goals and all these other things. And one section that we're able to put in addition to strategic plans and a couple of other things, are these general education or core curriculum checkboxes. Right now we have the 4 that Lorraine mentioned earlier. The neat thing about these is we can, let's say that they do change or that they need revised. It's very easy for me to get in, change the language, add, take them away, whatever we need to do. But for each outcome that someone enters, they can associate with one or more of these if they choose to. So that's kind of what the checkbox looks like. It's really, really simple, and it's not required, it's not mandatory, but we strongly encourage people to go in and do this. And how the report looks, once someone checks something like that off, there's a tab in Weave Online where you can run different types of reports, and this is the Gen Ed report. And they have what they call drill down reports. This particular page is the first page of the report from the 3rd outcome, which is communicate effectively in writing. And here, it just started with the A's. It's actually a pretty long report. It's listing every outcome by program that chose to associate with that particular Gen Ed outcome for us. So we know who has gone ahead and done that. We can run this kind of report. And you can also, it's just giving the short description here, but it will actually give the detailed description of the outcome too. If that's something that we were interested in, it can generate that kind of report. So this will be really useful for us if we're trying to see just what types of things people are doing. This is all, of course, assuming that people check the box. So if you are entering plans, pretty please, if you don't mind going through and checking those boxes, we really do appreciate it. This report just takes a couple minutes to run, but it's very, very valuable to us.
I'm sort of lost because I don't know what kind of outcomes you're talking about. What gets entered in that, and who decides if they really do apply or not?
The outcomes that different people enter, usually there's 1 or 2 designees per academic program, and sometimes it's a department head, sometimes it's just a graduate advisor even, and they are fed those outcomes from their department, so from the program itself. So sometimes there's a committee that decides these are the types of things we think that our students should learn by the time they have a BS in biology, and they'll list 4 to 5 or however many they want outcomes, and then they'll decide how are we going to decide if our students are meeting those outcomes, and they'll set up some measures and achievement targets, and they're basically writing an assessment plan that normally they've probably done it on paper before. We've really run into that with engineering in particular. They're just taking their ABET information and putting it into the electronic system so that it's all in one place.
It's actually not that bad. Basically, I asked all the faculty to actually come up with a matrix. We kind of followed what they did in ecosystem sciences and management, come up with a matrix in which they could tell me which of their courses addressed each of the outcomes that had already been suggested, and then did they have additional outcomes that they addressed in their course, so that I can map the courses onto the outcomes. But yes, I made up that list. Mine is not finalized yet. In fact, I just started to finalize it over this weekend. But I work very closely with the student advisors in our department to do that and do surveys like that through the email with the faculty.
My name is Candace Schaefer. I work at the University Writing Center, and I want to talk to you today about a completely different product, and I think the rest of the 3 of us will be talking about waypoint outcomes. And one of the things that we do at the University Writing Center, one of our charges, is to help faculty who teach writing, particularly W courses, but we're interested in writing in general. And we're always looking for products or things that will make the faculty's life, a little bit easier, hopefully. And we found this product. Actually, Summer was using it first, and we asked her to tell us about it. And so we decided to go ahead and get a trial license, and now we're going into our second year of using this product. And I'd like to just preface everything by saying that I'm always looking for products that faculty can use that make their lives easier, not more difficult. Okay? It should be easier to teach your classes by using technology. And a lot of times faculty are resistant to technology because it's really just more of a hassle. And there's a lot of data that's input into, let's say, a product, but you can't get the data back out of that to then examine it and look at it. Does that make sense? Because you go, okay, well, I put all this data, I have all this student data, I have all this information, but we can't get anything out of it. So now what I have to do then is piecemeal the data out of that and then put it into a different product and a different product. And then you go, well, when do I get to teach my class? So what I like about this particular product is that it's a dual purpose, okay? And the perspective that I'm going to speak from today is how do you as a faculty member, how does a faculty member get good, rich, accurate feedback to your students on writing assignments or any kind of assignment? It could be a performance, it could be a piece of artwork, it could be anything. But how do you get good feedback back to your students? And I don't know about you, but I taught freshman composition for 20 years. And you have a stack of 120 papers and you go through them and you write on the margins. Does it sound familiar? You write, and then you write the same thing on the margins. And then your handwriting by the very, very end, you're cramped and you say the same thing over and over. Well, what this product does is it allows you to give rich feedback to your students without cramping up, and also by thinking ahead of time. What do I say to students most often? And I'm not saying it's a magic bullet. It's not like you think it and it goes in paper. There is some front loading to this product. But if you think about what you want to tell your students, okay, then you can use this to input that information, and then when it's time to grade a set of papers, as Summer will tell you, it makes it much faster. Now, why is the Office of Institutional Assessment looking at this product? It's because once you have evaluated sets of papers, then there's a capability of going in and pulling data out and see how students are doing. Are they achieving? Okay, are they achieving? From my class perspective, is one student doing better on certain objectives that I've set? Or is my class reaching objectives? Or do I need to go back and reteach something to make sure that they get this by the end? And from a faculty perspective, let's look at the outcome first so you can see what the point is, and then I'll go back and show you the dirty details of what it looks like. When we say a rubric generating software, I think that's a bit of a misnomer, because it doesn't generate necessarily a rubric back to the student. It really generates what is, it looks like a rubric from your perspective, but to their perspective, it looks like a personalized memo or letter, okay? So this is what the student may get, okay? And Stephanie says, Joe, overall, this is a fine introduction. This is like a draft of a paper. It would be improved with some greater focus and by giving your readers a better sense of where you want them to go with your topic. I'll be happy to talk with you more about how you can take cues from the body of your paper in revisiting your introduction. And then here, paper's topic and focus. Your topic is clear, but your focus isn't quite specific enough. You're biting a little more than you can chew in a 5 to 7 page paper. Okay, you guys can read that. Thesis, organization, style, grammar, mechanics, and your grade. Well, Joe thinks, oh my goodness, she's talking just to me, just to me. She wrote a letter just to me. And if you think about this and you think about writing a personalized memo to each student, can you imagine how long it would take to grade a set of papers? And you're looking at this going, Schaefer, there's no way. There's no way. Okay? However, on the back side of the page, okay, you can see that a lot of this material has been pre-loaded. Okay? She typed in what she says, what she feels are the 5, highest level. You do a terrific job narrowing your topic to a specific focus. Well, that's not what Joe got in his memo, right? She didn't pick that one. Number 4, not quite as good. Your topic is clear, but your focus isn't quite specific enough. You're biting off a little more than you can chew in a 5 to 7 page paper. Here you go. All she had to do is click that button, and that goes in that memo right there. But she's not limited to that. She wanted to personalize it a little bit, so she added a few sentences when she was grading the papers. Okay? Back on the other side, the thesis and so forth. So, I mean, theoretically, you could grade your papers very, very quickly using this if you did not add extra feedback as Stephanie did. Okay? And then she gave overall comments. Okay. That's what it looks like, okay? This is what the login page, it's also a subscription service. We don't run the servers, we subscribe to it. It's a web-based service. And this is the login screen. The way we use it is a lot of you are already Blackboard Vista users. You don't have to use Blackboard Vista. You don't have to even touch Blackboard Vista after you synchronize your rosters. But as you know, we have FERPA rules, that we have to, and so what we do is we go through Blackboard Vista to synchronize the rosters just one time, okay? Then you can either go through the page, the waypoint page, or Blackboard Vista. Basically, there's a file that you put in Blackboard, and it says link to waypoint. If you go ahead and advance to the next one, that brings you right to this page. You're already logged in, and it says Candace Schaefer logged in at the bottom. And up at the top, it says sync student roster. If you've already created a class in Blackboard, and no materials or anything like that, if they've just set up the basics for you, you just, you email ITS, there's a little form you fill out. Then you click Sync Student Roster, and it synchronizes the student roster. You don't ever have to go back through Blackboard again, okay? How quick this is, Gwendolyn Webb Johnson came to my session in December. She told me at 10:30, I think it was 10:30 to 12, she said, I have a set of papers I have to have graded by 6 o'clock tonight. And I have my rubric here in Word. Can we set this up and can I grade the papers? And we did. We were sweating just a little bit. That's a little tight. It's a little tight. But I wanted to help her out. We put the rubric in. She already had a class in Blackboard, so we synchronized the roster. That took about 30 seconds, and we were ready to go. Okay? All right? Now, this is what I'd like a little bit prettier interface, but I'm not the programmer, but we can still work on that. But as you can see, I have all of my assignments then listed here. An assignment would be a rubric, let's say, if I were to translate that. And I think, that's probably the case. You can share rubrics within your department. You can also search for rubrics that other people have shared at other universities, if you wish. Okay? Your rubrics aren't shared with anybody automatically. But some people say, I really like this rubric. They've gone to Waypoint and say, I'd like to share this with the world. That sounds like a great idea at first, but what I've found is everybody's rubrics or assignments tend to be so specific that I found that when I was trying to adapt somebody else's, it would have been faster for me to do it on my own. I don't know about you guys, okay? So you can link to any of those, they look then when you open them up, you input the data, and then at the end it looks just like this. Okay? And what happens then is this is where you input the data, and what I wanted to link to is back what Amber and Lorraine were saying about the TAMU Gen Ed goals. Every time you put in a row to the rubric, okay, or an observation in a rubric, what you do is you have to link to a particular competency. The TAMU Gen Ed competencies are already there. So are the wildlife and fisheries. So if you're doing a programmatic assessment, all you need to do is make sure that one of us, Lorraine, myself, Amber, Michelle, we will get with the company and put in your programmatic kind of objectives or competencies. And then you can have your faculty pick one or more of these. Then, Brandon's going to talk about how you then run those reports and the data. So what you're doing is you're setting up a way to grade papers in a very efficient fashion, but then store all that data so that you or somebody else in your program or at the university can go back and pull that and make some meaningful or draw some meaningful conclusions about how are my students learning? How are they doing? Are they doing okay? Either through the rubric or through the competency, either way.
So picking up right where Candace has left off, This is my third semester in Mays Business School using Waypoint very specifically to evaluate our students. And we have a general sophomore course that I'm essentially a lab instructor for, dealing specifically with communication topics. So as lab instructor, I deal with I think we started out with maybe just over 100 students last spring. And then, and this is a new writing intensive course, so newly required. Over 100 students last spring. We moved up to 356 in the fall, and we're now at 514 for this spring semester. So we needed a tool that lets us give that rich feedback. Definitely feeling individualized and personally tailored to each individual student. So this has been great for us, and don't worry, I don't do it all alone. I have a team of trained writing evaluators who are peers who were in the class in the sections before, and are now actually become a really great conversation point for dealing with students, because they're peers who've been through the experience and who can say, I know that you may think we're being harsh on, we may be coming down harsh on grading on the grammar, but here's why, and here's what this means for a business perspective. So the great thing about this tool is we can tailor this assignment, this rubric, to specifically our wants and needs. For instance, on writing an English paper, error interference may not be as high of an issue as it is for business writing. So I got to weight my error interference. First of all, I got to call it error interference so that they understood that it interferes with your reader's processing of the document versus just grammar. So I could help kind of impart that in the language I used myself in that rubric. But error interference, I could weight it at 60% of my grade or 40% of my grade, whereas Candace, maybe in working with an English class, may weight it at 10%. So it's very individualized. This is my rubric. This is what we want to impart for our learning outcomes. The images coming up that I want to show you, I've linked directly to the Gen Ed competencies, since those are the ones that we've been talking about in this series. Most specifically, most of my items related to communicate effectively. So what you're seeing in here, I'm going to show you, instead of looking at it from the Mays Business School perspective, looking at it from overall, what does that look like? So now we go through and we generate that individual feedback that you saw Candace give us. But what we come up with is something that lets me see from the get-go how my students are doing, what instructional imperatives do we need to bring into the classroom to fix things that we're seeing happen. Up top, you're seeing their scores on general ed competencies on a draft assignment. This is one single assignment. We actually have them do draft and revised versions so we can compare feedback. So you're looking at a draft and then a revised. So what you'll see probably the most exciting part for me looking at this is my green bar is does not meet expectations. So somewhere with ethical leadership in this assignment, they are not meeting expectations in this draft. And this is the point where I get to celebrate, tap dance in the street. Coming down to my revised version, there's no more green. And that is just from the basic point of what we're trying to do with assessment. That is what we're going for. Is what we're doing in the classroom working? And in fact, there were some ethics lessons that were introduced as part of that took place between the draft and revised. And between that and getting some really nice feedback that Candace showed you guys, you're biting off more than you can chew, that kind of feedback, they're able to see what they're doing wrong and correct it. And I have a record of it. So this is as an instructor working directly with students, this is what I want to look at. Fran will have some more specific details on how that looks in her classes. But the other major point is, as you see in each of these, that red bar, which maybe the red and green should be flipped so that green means go, red means. But that red bar, advanced, has grown in each category. So that's, again, a key point. My point isn't to penalize them for doing poorly, but to help them move further along in this competency. So please continue. And this next one looks again at that same assignment, looking specifically at communicating effectively and ethical leadership. And you see draft to revise, again, and both of these are red bars in this view. Both of these improved. And probably the first thing we realized that specifically with this, that's where my ethical leadership is, scoring at 0.5, where they could score all the way up to 1 if they were operating at full steam 100%. So again, with this comparison, I see over a single assignment how that looks. But then moving one slide further, this is my overall every single assignment that we produced over the course of the semester. And this breaks it down again through Gen Ed competencies, and I could have done it through my Mays competencies. But this shows me, and there's my standard deviation among scores, is my little bar. pretty nice stat symbol. But this shows me that overall we are improving from draft to revised versions. Now, not everyone will have draft to revised versions, but you could do first assignment to last assignment. You could process this could filter the data in any sort of way that you want to produce. I could track a single student doing this. I could track a single student over time. I could track, because I work with right now 11 sections, 9 sections last semester, I could have looked at one particular section to see, is there something going on in this section? And I could also generate data specifically on each of those that also kind of gives me a list of the feedback they've gotten and then anything that we've changed or edited to show, so that would give me an idea of what changes we made within that rubric, that it spits it out for me so that I could be able to tell, okay, between ethical leadership, I need to target these 3 things when I go into class. So I could generate a report of that dealt just specifically with classes. And because I work with a team of graders, I could look at each individual rater, those kinds of things. But again, the key point of this data for me is that I can assess from a class-wide perspective, are we doing what we want? And is this actually working? And that's been probably the most valuable tool. That in addition to providing rich and detailed feedback for my students. But please, I'll pass this along to Fran, but please let me know if y'all have questions about how we're functioning and what we do. It's a little bit different.
What I wanted to give you as an example on this one was that you see here a fisheries management plan. My students do a field project, and then they write up a fisheries management plan for a private landowner for a particular water body on their land. And so I have several drafts of that report. It's essentially writing the report in steps from, introduction, methods, results, et cetera, until you get to the final report. And so this gave me a way to track, again, improvement over the semester as they finish that report. And let's see. Yeah, go ahead. And so I had not mastered yet the database manipulation for this, so all I did was print out the graphs, and in fact, just the graphs are very handy to have anyway. And these are the graphs for that particular assignment for that class. So basically, you can map, just like we were just saying for the Mays Business School, for an individual assignment, you can map the first assignment in the upper left, and you can map those results onto the last assignment, which are the exact same outcomes, except instead of just being part of the assignment, now it's the whole assignment. So we have the introduction, let's see, that's titled Introduction, Study Site Methods. Those things, we have the bars that show how many students achieved what level of success on that. And then we have the exact same thing for the final assignment. And so I can make a comparison there. Had I known how to use the database, I would have done that, but I don't think I did that. But you can very quickly, as soon as you've graded all the papers, you can see how well they've done. And I was pleased. They did actually do better. So
it tends to take us that step more than intuition, right? I feel like they're just missing this part, and it gives me my data for it.
Yeah, exactly. I thought I'd give you an example here of how we took maybe a particular outcome that's in the rubric, and we've actually mapped it on the Gen Ed outcomes, the Wildlife and Fisheries outcomes, and you can, again, this gives you a map that you can go by. So if you want to generate a report, for the university, for your department, for an individual faculty member, again, I'm speaking as a faculty member, I think something like this, my faculty would not want to, on every assignment they have, pick out each little part of the assignment that pertains to a particular outcome. At the point we are now, it's program outcomes, and we're kind of mapping onto whole courses as opposed to mapping on the individual assignments like this is. But I saw the beauty in this when we sat in the presentation that Candace did, and I said, gosh, we can do that at the program level as well. We just need to have a few of those outcomes mapped onto our courses and particular questions that we can have a teaching assistant or someone enter into our waypoint assessments rubrics, and bingo, we've captured that data. And what I love about it is it's there forever. you can go back, you know, a year, 2 years later, and you can mine that data again. So that's particularly what I got out of it. I thought maybe our faculty would be very happy that was one more thing they didn't have to do.
Just to say, the data looks a little bit like the individual, looking at the individual student achievement and so forth. You can look in graph format at how your graders are doing, and if there is a grader who is far off on a certain, you know, you could either take that grader aside or renorm, you know, recalibrate, whatever you think the appropriate measure is on that, and then move on. And that's probably why Summer hasn't had trouble now, because she's been doing that all along.
Yeah. But probably, and this is just an add-on, but probably my favorite moment for what this produces from an assessment standpoint, that's kind of an imperative of the business school and what we're working towards, is that I am automatically generating data on, we have 7 core competencies that we want to create within the business school that also map back to the gen ed competencies. We can already see, with working with this group of sophomores, now more than 500 sophomores will be in our system, we can see how that cohort is doing. And I can compare that right now from the get-go. It's live data, it's growing data, I'm adding to it each semester. And, you know, we can always go back and do assessments of capstone courses to see how the seniors are doing as they exit our program. But right now, at kind of entry point for dealing with communication as our specific kind of competency, we have a live measure of how they're doing. I'm not quite sure what we'll do with all this data yet, but we know that it will factor into something that we've got such comparisons on all these points. Oh yes. So we're actually improving. We've done a lot of like pre-class moments so that they're actually working on concepts in class. We've relied in the past on voice over PowerPoints. Kind of really cool at first when I first thought about how we can provide this information to students. We're talking about 17 to 23 minutes, and it's a lecture. It's streaming video, but it's just literally voice over PowerPoint. It's just that record narration function. So that was one thing that we realized wasn't really impacting our students. So I just decided to do they're rather quirky because I have that property, some rather quirky like 5 to 7 minute YouTube videos on each of the assignments that they were about to encounter. And this became great out of class support, but more importantly, they responded well to it. I'm actually working with my thesis on this project and actually found my only significant correlation here in the regression was YouTube videos to improving their learning. So my PowerPoint videos, not so much. Apparently that still felt like a lecture. But being able to link to YouTube 5 minutes with some very specific directives, it was kind of like I took my own advice into account. You know, when you're writing in business writing, get to the bullet points, give specific directions, and that actually seemed to work well for students too. Imagine that. But we even have, you know, my writing assistants serve as, you know, help tutors as well. Even that wasn't as strongly significantly tied to improvement in scores between those draft and revise as those YouTube videos. So this is something we were able to specifically target, and we've decided to kind of do away with a lot of our voiceover PowerPoints and start from scratch with something that they will be able to take into account. So that's an outside class support that we like to use in this course, especially as it grows to 535 students. Hopefully it stops there. But especially as we're talking about that sheer number, we're trying to provide enough one-on-one tools for them. So we are definitely making changes as a result of knowing exactly how they're performing and what their experience is. And we continue to make changes in that coursework. Of course, it has nothing to do at all with the fact that we've got the Center for Teaching Excellence's former director as our guide and main pioneer, but she certainly has had a hand in helping us see how to revise our courses as we move along.
So right now we just use, you know, the comments feature in Word so we can actually show exactly what we're talking about. And what I'm seeing so far has been the end result, sort of an email or a memo that the student is getting with like a summary, but is there a way in the program to actually highlight certain things as you're going through? Because obviously there may be something that might keep happening, but you don't want to put it in this memo because then they might say, what are they talking about? I don't remember. So like, is there a way to pull things out into the margin within the document?
I'm going to let Candace. Well, first of all, I'm glad you asked that question because, right, I'm glad you asked that question because I think it's very confusing at first that Waypoint does not store the documents. So anything you want to do with the document is separate, and so it's only the evaluation part of it that is stored in the program. So if you wanted to make comments and insert comments, do that in addition to what you're doing. And a lot of people do both and. It's not an either or. You don't have to necessarily make a choice. But the other thing you want to think about too is we work with an online writing lab with our consultants, and we get papers sent in electronically to us. And with the track changes and the insert comments and so forth, I have to be very careful with my, and this kind of is outside the advice of the program. I'm just saying this because we work with electronic documents and that. I have to train my consultants not to insert a lot of comments because they want to fix everything. And so I tell them to go ahead and insert a comment as an example, explain the example, and then say, look, I found about 10 others of these. You might want to go through the document and then resubmit it. So I found that my consultants were too dependent on insert comments, and then they would actually edit the piece for them. So I think that if you might be able to strike a balance where you make your life a little easier, where you don't have to insert all those comments. You can put some of those and say, look, in the general feedback I gave you, looked on page 3. I've told you exactly what's going on and given you an example. Now you need to go fix the rest of them. So that's kind of like that was probably more of an answer than you wanted, but I found that that's how you can balance both of them without actually killing yourself with time, because it takes so much time. Franny, do you want to?
I was just going to say, Waypoint does have a function in it, but if you're not used to using it, but it's very similar to track changes, and you can use that and upload that with it. But again, the document itself doesn't get stored, which is actually a good thing.
The other thing I wanted to mention that I think someone was talking about, first of all, is with the Blackboard to sync your rosters. I know it's the English department here. We also work with the English department in Moodle to synchronize rosters as well. So that's an element as well. Waypoint's pretty agile about that. And the other thing I want to mention, I think Summer brought this up, is that you may not want to use all the same, I mean, your faculty may be resistant to all using the same rubric, and I want to emphasize the fact that you don't have to do that. Everybody doesn't have to get together at a faculty meeting and say, okay, we are going to all use the same rubric. Because of the competencies, because they can say, okay, well, this fits that competency. I'm going to pull that competency, and you can run your data on the competencies rather than the actual elements and assignments. And I think that gives individual faculty members freedom that perhaps sharing a rubric around a department doesn't afford. It doesn't limit and constrict an individual faculty member's ability to measure what he or she wants to measure.
Well, I was going to say, and plus they don't feel like they have to address every single thing on that rubric. You know, they may have only one assignment that they do all year, but it's right on with that particular competency, and so that's all they need to track, at least at this point in time when you're just trying to ease everybody into it.
I'm fairly new to rubrics. It's only been about 3 years since I sat on my first rubric workshop. I've graded papers a long time. And I went to hard copy rubrics, and then this last year I was going to go into Waypoint. And things didn't get done in time, and in August I realized, uh-oh, the upfront on this is a lot bigger. I've used Blackboard Vista rubrics, and this offers a lot of flexibility and potential that you can't get out of the rubrics in Vista. And so I really want to move to it, but what I realized was I need a bunch more up front to get up to speed to use this. It's all up front, not in the back.
Yeah, it's all front-end loaded, yes.
And what that means as far as adoption is you're really going to have to look at a university and how to invest in helping faculty get up there because of the time required front end to get into it. You know.
But at any rate, I was asking her, you know, how do you broaden? They're struggling with the same thing, and one of the things she was telling us was that there really needed to be a person who, much like when Candace helped you helped the other person get the rubric in and they graded by 6 o'clock and all of that stuff.
Right.
Pretty much what Lois was telling me from the University of Virginia is we almost need that kind of a support for, you know, anybody to be able to call and then get that sort of support to get it going.
I think I have a couple of comments in relation to implementation. First of all, it's scary to think that you would put all that work into it and it might go away in 2010. So, you know, that's part of it, I think, having some kind of bigger guarantee that it will still be there. But secondly, I know that
trying to have an individual work with an individual is just an unrealistic goal. It might be helpful if you want to get colleges and departments involved is to pick one particular thing like assessment of capstone courses or assessment of master's theses or assessment of doctoral theses and make a package of that for university assessment, not necessarily for departmental assessment, and have, start with something that could be consistent across a bigger span, and then people might bring it down.
Well, I think I'd like to address the question of will it stay around? We bought it as a trial last year, and we got actually a really nice price on it because the company is still kind of emerging, and they're very agile. When I gave a workshop, I guess it was last summer, I wanted some other sort buttons, and I didn't like the way it was sorted, and so I called or I emailed and I said, can we do this, this, and this? And they had it done by the next day, actually, because they said that was a good idea and a good question on sorting by ID number and so forth. And so they're very agile and very responsive. We decided to go ahead, and we did pay the full price this next year based on our size and so forth. And I think that the only hesitancy is we do need to reach a critical mass. I mean, we do have, Summer's already using it with 500 students, and that's great. And it's a chicken or the egg thing, yes, exactly. Exactly.
They need to know it's going to be here to want it.
And I also understand the front-end loading issue that Mort talked about also in terms of it isn't a matter of I thought that I could take my existing rubrics from Microsoft Word and copy and paste them into Waypoint. And that didn't really give me, the memo that I gave you at the very first, that didn't really then translate because it was in third person. Most rubrics are written in third person. So I did have to recraft, and as Mort was saying, recraft the kind of the concept. And so we've done some introductory Waypoint workshops on just how to push the darn buttons. Maybe what we need to do next is work with maybe the Center for Teaching Excellence and so forth and say, okay, how do we then recraft our rubrics or rethink our feedback and maybe with Fran and Summer and think about that and make it a little bit easier for faculty so they don't have to think of it all themselves, make it a little easier hopefully.
I guess I'm having a hard time seeing how I would use this in my class, which is genetics. I give problems on exams that have right answers or wrong answers, and we grade and so forth. And I think the same with physics and math and so forth. I don't know if there's a rubric of your answer is right, your answer is wrong.
Well, so, thinking just from the rubric standpoint, your answer is right or wrong, but isn't there a correct way to outline some of that problem solving? Is it something that's deeper than just my answer is 24?
Often not. A probability problem or,
okay.
What sequence do you get if you do this and so forth.
Well, is there something that outlines steps within that? The correct steps to arrive at that answer. And I'm thinking very specifically of like Nancy Simpson, for instance, teaches Math 141, 142. And you get kind of partial credit if you list out certain steps. So that we're talking about the answer is 24. There's those steps that help our students reason towards that answer.
Because you have this fundamental error. I think there's some consistent feedback, mistakes that you see regularly that could be built into that rubric.
And that may be where you see your improvement over time, too.
So you might have some mistakes as part of your, level 1, 2, 3, and 4.
The next exam is all different.
Well, maybe not. Maybe not.
Well, and I think we have to be careful about not trying to force this into every single spot. And that's why I said if we could find something that was useful to a wide audience, that would be a place to start. People might then, the way I learn how to do these kinds of things is I see somebody do a good implementation of it. And so I very seldom can imagine it myself, but I can take what somebody did and say, oh, that's like what I do, here. So having some examples, but particularly having some use at a need level. So you might not ever do it in your genetics class, but your department might use it for something else that you could contribute to, like capstone course results or master's theses or something like that.
And you have to find the right tool for the job. It might not be.
You commented that these rubrics are very specific to the course and the specific assignment, but I found going in and looking at those shared rubrics, it was a wealth of ideas.
Right.
Nothing that I was going to template, but like the question that you're asking. Hey, wow, look what they did. And it sets me to thinking, how can I then begin to adapt it and use it? So I found the shared rubrics very useful from that standpoint. Not that I could adopt them